Hi, welcome to our third final session, implementing business solutions in Azure Cloud. And today we're going to be focusing on the monitoring and the performance of our APIs and how do we do some analysis and how do we inspect logs for exceptions? How do we track how our API is performing? And also we're going to just look at a couple of other options as well. So where do we leave things off? We actually built the environments. So if you look at where we are in the process, we've actually gone through this process here. We've actually built out APIs. We've tested upload into a URL. We validated the API. We got a batch ID that came back. We could actually retrieve the data through a batch ID. We can run through that one more time just for clarity, right? So, and then we've proven that we can upload different types of data sets. So, if you want to get an existing data sets that we did from the last session, we can hit the Give me a second here. Let me just switch over to a different agent. We can actually run our API. It still works and get some data back, right? So we're going to just continue from there, right? Just give you a few seconds. It's just warming up. So we have data back, right? So we have proven that we can actually pull data back. We can a JSON response back. The upload piece is still working as expected. Let me just close a few things. So now we know that data is coming back in JSON format. So it's going to format itself because of now we can move on to the next step. And the next thing we're going to talk about is in Azure is how do we monitor all this data? What does that mean in Azure, right? So when you go to Azure, we've actually done a couple of things. So we go back to our resource group here. It's a little slow today. And then I'm going to go back to the resource group that we're actually working in. Oops, it's expired. So we log back in again. And that's one thing you should be, the sessions don't hold on. You probably have to authenticate every time you log into the portal, depending on how long the session is open for. So you will get this session expired every so often. It's a little slow today, but it's going. So now we've successfully logged into the portal. What we can do is look at some application information, right? So we're going to go into our resource group. Get this out of the way. We don't need that right now. Expand this so we can see what we're doing. And then we're going to look at going to our resource group here. And we're going to go into a thing called application insights, right? So application insights is a very interesting product, right? So it's another resource that's automatically tied into your API and can investigate the behavior of application, right? So in the last session, we ran a couple of API endpoints. We can actually go into our application settings. We just go into the performance section here. That's kind of where everything lives. And then from there, we can navigate back and forth to understand what's going on with each of these things and what this means. So basically, the performance is just basically giving you a highlight of where you are performing. You can drill down into specific areas. So, for example, if we ran a couple of events earlier, and then it tells you what the performance is on each one. You can actually go in and view the samples, and then you can go into the actual date and you can view by date and then you can click this and then you can tell you how long it took for you to do an upload, how long it took to do a retrieve, and then you can actually drill down into each of this. Now, what's happening here is that this is actually going as part of the retrieve is actually going in and it's calling the API here. This is where we're passing the API endpoint. This is calling our backend system. This is actually building the request to pull back all the data that we care about, and this is running the full trace. If you decide to, this is a snapshot here. If you decide to view all, this gives you the breakdown of each individual function and what it's doing at each step of the way. Now we have this thing called dimensions. This actually tells you what process is running. This is retrieving this is retrieving retrieve to query to retrieve batch ID. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about quickly is what's the purpose of the application inside, how can you track each event, right? So I go back to my code base, and then we go into the config file one more time, and we look at the two configs that we had. Every single config here has a key that's attached to that, right? And this is for tracking purposes, right? So I didn't spell this correctly, but this is for tracking purposes, right? So when you track your data, you have a way to copy that information and check to see whether it made your backend process. So for example, even if I go into application insights here and I cancel this and I go into the logs, which is on the left side of the screen, and I go into, just give me a second to load. You have the thing called a query, is a query log. This allows you, this is a hub that allows you to actually query your data. Now you want to go into the advanced tab if to do what they call a KQL mode. And if you want to still start out, if you want to just start out searching your application, you're not too sure what to do, you just use the search button, right? So you do a search, um, and you just paste in this query, and this will actually run and to tell you how many times we ran this query, right? So and it tells you when we ran the query. So we ran the query. This is Eastern Standard Time. It tells you when we ran it during the time. I had a session around 1 at 6 p.m. today. We just queried that database just now. I came back a result set, but this actually gives you an idea of when your queries are being ran, right? So that's something something to know when you're actually working with application insights. You want to understand what's going on with your applications. You can get to a granular level of actually looking at individual processes that ran, and then you can actually build charts that represent these individual policies that ran, right? So I'm just going to get an example query that we can use. Just give me a second here. And I want us to run a query that says, okay, I want to know when my query ran. I want to build a chart of the queries that ran during the course of the day. So if someone is querying this batch file continuously through the course of the day, you can actually gather information around what query ran through that course of the day, right? So let's get into the details of that. I'm just going to pull a query up. Just give me a quick second. I'm going to choose one from my auto repository so I can actually get an idea of so I'm going to run a blanket, what they call a custom events, because this thing does support custom events, right? And what a custom event is, it allows you to customize certain names that you have and pull that out, right? So that's what I'm doing here. So I'm pulling a custom event, pasting that in here. This is actually checking with the process name. And then if you run this, it's gonna oops, a second. And then you can see that charts ran. So we had to convert to JSON, we have the query batch, we have to retrieve, we have transfer, payload, response, we have to write to storage. These are all the processes that ran. And you can do process of elimination by reducing the window in which it ran. The reason why this is a big window is because we ran at 1:30, then we ran at 6 o'clock. That's the reason why this window is pretty big, right? But if you ran the events around the same time, then it will be as big as that. So let's just bring this down to like 6 hours, or let's bring it down to 4 hours. Let's see what we have in the 4 hour window. We only have these two events in the 4 hour window. So if you look at it from this point of view, we only ran the two events that ran in the 4 hour window are query to retrieve, and we have query by batch. Those are the two ones, the two processes that ran. So this is a way of actually indicating how many processes ran in a certain period of time. We can do like a we can render it in different formats. So we can render area chart, bar chart, bar chart, and the table. So we just want this basic table. We can go back to table format, and it just pulls it back and gives it to you in the table. And it just tells you that this query ran. These are the two queries that ran and how many times it's ran. And as we run more queries to the system, so if I actually go to my API, which we're going to run an example now, I'm going to bring this into play. And we're going to do one more upload here. Just give it a minute to render. Why this is so slow. Then what we'll do is that we're going to try one more time. Select a file. You select a new file here. I'm going to go up to testing data here. And we're going to go into the retail. So we're going to focus on retail. We're going to pick something that's small here. Maybe this file here. Open this guy up and send it to the backend. I think it's about 20,000 records in here. And I'm testing with large data sets just to show that we can support large data sets. But advisably, if you're in a production environment, keep your data sets low because remember, this is static data that is going to be used across multiple APIs. So this is actually uploading. Let's hopefully it may make it. Let's see. Hope it doesn't time out on us. All right, so we have a success. 20,000 records came back. I was accurate to the actual amount. So the count is 20,000 records came back. That was very successful. No records was dropped. I'm gonna query that batch now and then see where those records can come back. So that data is coming back is about 7 megs in size. The data is coming back out. This is a different data set. So like I mentioned before, we have different data sets that are supported by the API. And one of the benefits here is that this is just a data set that talks about SKUs, description. This is a retail store that sells different types of items. And basically, we're just capturing maybe the data set for the day. We're just creating a batch and they upload the initial batch of how many transactions happen that course of the day, what they have in stock that course of the day. And maybe they have less than 20,000 records or up to 20,000 records. They can upload it into an API like this. And then you can actually get a visualization of what that looks like. I mean, this takes a while to render. Just that's the reason why it's hanging here because it's using a lot of memory to render the information. So the next thing we're going to look at now is we go back to App Insights, switch gears a little bit. Let's switch gears to Application Insights. What were we doing? Sorry about that. Let's get back here. We can query this data, and what will end up happening is that because we have two pieces of information here, we'll end up having three pieces of information here. So now we have more pieces of information here. So in that short space of time, we had to retrieve records by batch. We have to write to storage account. We can create the records. So now we're closer to the dimensions that we're looking at. And now if we look at it in the chart, it starts to make more sense, right? So if you look at this in the chart, it starts to look like, okay, we have items coming out around a certain time, and we have more items coming out here. So you can actually just go in here and do it and look at it this way. Or you can look at it in a line chart. So the different rendering options are here. So if I want to look at it in a maybe in a time series chart, I can actually select that, run this, and I will get a different representation of the data. If I want to look at it, this is how it looks like here. If I want to look at it in a bar chart, I can easily change that. And then I can get a representation of the data over here. All right, so this gives me a representation of the data in a bar chart here. So it's giving me a different way of looking at the data. And then you can unselect, remove things that you don't want to care about. If you only care about what was happened, what query was ran, or you're just interested in what was read to a storage account, you can actually just reduce or remove the items that you don't care about because it's at reporting all the keys, and you can just focus on the times this ran and how often it ran if you want to do that, right? And at the end of the day, if you want to take it back to a table, we can actually look at it in a table and we can see the information in there. So we know basically how many times a particular process ran. And this is very important if you're asking a situation where we have a lot of data that's running through. Now, the other thing you can do is that if you want to be able to capture um, information around what batch IDs were executed in your environment, you can do some research. And the whole point of using Crystal Query is not you don't necessarily have the answers, but you do have a way to retrieve the information, right? So this retrieve endpoint does have a batch ID attached to it. So let's just go to the performance tab again. And when in doubt, come to the performance tab here. And then when you switch over to the performance tab, and while that's loading, I wanted to show you in the last session, we actually captured some errors, right? So we captured errors in the last section. This errors that we're looking at here. And we're going to see how we can visualize that inside of here to see when an error happens and you get a code back. Does that code make any sense? So because we have some error handling in place, when the application does throw errors, which I mean is expected from any application, and is we have an understanding of what errors were thrown and why it was thrown, right? So this actually is a retrieve. So you can see the APIs here. So we can actually query based on specific types of APIs. And we can actually do that inside of Azure itself. So if I want to do a search on this guy, there's no need, there's no reason why I can't just go into my logs here. I ran this query already, so that's fine. And it does keep a history of the samples as well, so you can rerun them. So just track those. Then what I can do is I can go in here, get rid of this, do a search. And like I said, when you're in doubt, you can just do a random search and then you can select all, you can run this. And what you do is you're going to pull down all representations of API, including all the endpoints I've ran. And then you can build that's why I ran it once, right? So you can build a custom dimension here that represents the API endpoints that you're trying to focus on, right? So, and another thing we did, another thing we did when we actually provisioned the API, and if you don't remember, is that we went into, I'll fire up another session here. I'll keep this open. When we set up our function app, one of the things that I did was I ensured that we have a name attached in the configuration file with our function app. And I'm going to show you that if you don't remember in our first session when we did the original setup. So if I go back to the actual function app itself, which I'm going to go right now, and I'm going to go in here into details, and I'm going to go into my configuration section. There is a way to track individual applications behavior over a period of time. So you want to track the history of a specific function app, and you may be in a production environment where you have multiple of these function apps running, and you just want to be able to capture those logs that is specific to this function app. The thing that I gave was an app name, right? So this app name is very important, right? So when you give it the app name, you can grab the app name, go into your query, and then what you can do is that you can actually just paste that in here, and then you can actually run this. And what this will do, we give you every single call that was made, and to give you some details around those calls that are made, right? So if you open up each of these, it tells you what calls are made in the last 4 hours. We have that, right? So we have 6:14, we made a recent call. You can open these up individually, and then you can see how long each of these processes took. You can see at the elapsed time, the correlation ID that was used to generate that, the operation ID that was used to generate that. So this is information that allows you to build um, things around how you're going to report on it. So this is good for reporting. A lot of these things can connect to Power BI for reporting if you wanted to do that, but that's another session we'll talk about it. But this data is available in Log Analytics Workspace, which can be connected to used by via the API. You can connect to Power BI. You can actually pull data in. So the goal here is that even though we didn't configure application insights, which is something that normally if you have to write this from scratch, you have to wire up application insight yourself. We actually have capabilities built in the orchestration system to allow you to actually pull key pieces of information that will make sense to you so we can actually call into the system, right? And another good example is that when we hit an error point in the second session, we had an issue where it says the user ID was not present and it threw an error code. Now, error codes are very important because when you're working with third-party systems, and your application is behaving in maybe it's throwing an exception, we want to be able to capture as much information as possible. So when we're dealing with the client, we can be more focused on what the exception is versus having to call the client and asking what the exception is. So because we have enough information, this ran over in the last 24 hours. So let's say last 12 hours. So when we saw the exception earlier, it actually threw the exception. And then we can see the custom event that raised the exception. And then we can also, if you go into the exception itself, even though the exception was highlighted, you get a call. If you're looking at it from a developer standpoint, you get a call stack that caused the exception, and you can see that user ID was not present in the dictionary. So if you look at that here, it's actually calling into the runtime, and it's calling into the runtime method itself, and then you can see where the issue happened. So this is very important information if you had to contact me or someone in the ZA team to actually resolve an issue if it's an ongoing issue. So we have extensive information around what caused the issue. So this is very important when you guys decide to use this solution. We have enough information to actually resolve problems, and then we can make changes as needed. So that's what I got for monitoring, right? There's one more thing that is very important to know inside of App Insights is you two things that you be using is you have the live metrics. The live metrics actually tells you how many physical servers are running. Um, so here is where you have tells you gives you information around the server that's running, right? So to showcase that, what I can do is I can go into my API here and I'm gonna hit this button to retrieve the data, and I'm gonna quickly, oops, it's offline. It's gonna come back online for a second. I'm quickly hit this button. Oops, what's going on here? It's send, come back here, and then you will see a blip here. So you see the lines here, you see some traffic going here. So this is live, this collects live information. And this is actually hitting our dependency systems. You can see the CPU spike over here. You can see traces of what happened. You can see exceptions of what happened. So this is what you give to a network operations center or a NOC. And what it can do is they can actually monitor the behavior of APIs. And if they see any exceptions coming out here, they can actually give you real-time telemetry on what's going on. The other thing that's very important is your transaction search, right? So transaction search reports on everything, every single activity that happened in the API and all the dependent systems that it touches. So if you look at dependencies, you look at traces, you look at custom events, you look at requests, you look at exceptions, you can capture all those and you can narrow it down to specific things. And they have them color coordinated, which is really cool. So you can actually see how your application is performing. Like this is a dependency system, is systems that it actually touches. So if it touches um, a storage account of some sort, you get a dependency system to call. If it touches a SQL database, you get a dependency system call. So it's actually telling you the dependencies inside of that system. And if you click on that, you can actually do that. Now, another thing that's pretty cool in here is that you can actually go in like I did here. I can go in here. And if you don't feel like using the logs, you can actually search in here for the exception that happened in your transaction search. This is a wildcard search. So you can actually paste that in there, hit the button, and if we're lucky, you will get results set back and tells you what happened. So this is actually another way to actually, most preferred way to actually go in and actually see exceptions. So it tells you here exactly the given key for the user ID was not present. It tells you the coloration ID that was generated because that's coloration that was provided. And it tells you what steps, what the function name that ran it, which is why I provided, and the actual exception itself, which it says the problem ID for the exception that happened here. And with that information, you can actually deduce what happened, what time the exception happened. And you can build information around exceptions and you can remediate your APIs as soon as possible. So that's the one of the benefits of application insights. So with that, hopefully you enjoy this session of implementing business solutions in Azure Cloud. My information will be available in the README. So this README right here, the README which I mentioned earlier on, will have my information at the bottom. I'm still updating that, but if you go into this README, I'm going to expand this a little bit so you can see. You grab this URL, and then basically you should be able to find my information, or you can reach out to me directly, GitHub, when you open up an issue up here. So if you go up here, you wanted to reach out to me, you can actually open up what we call an issue. Then the issue basically you can type it in here, and then you can actually just request for something in here. Then you can just open up an issue here, and then I'll respond back to you as soon as possible if you need help implementing this solution in your environment. Well, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully I'll have another session, another business use case, and I hope you follow me. Thank you. I'm going to stop recording.